Okay.
And if you, and Anne, before
Yeah.
Anne starts, if anyone has questions for Anne Poritzky and this wonderful
Yeah, you
presentation.
we spell
Please,
it the same way, so.
please put them in chat and address them to everyone so that I can see them, and then I will present them to Anne Poritzky when she has a break in her presentation. So take it away, Anne.
Okay, thank you very much. Anne and I enjoy having the same name and needing to differentiate between the two of us since we both spell it without any. Excuse me. Welcome all of you today. It's lovely to see you, and we're going to, as you know, talk about interviewing today. And yes, that is Waldo on my front screen here. He is in an interview where the interview is asking, where's Waldo in 5 years? Anyway, we'll talk about that and similar questions like, tell me about yourself, or what are your strengths and weaknesses? What salary do you want? Why did you leave your last job? And stuff like that. But first, I'd like to, okay. First, I'd like to talk about the good news about job interviews. You know, a lot of times they cause anxiety, that sort of thing. And too often people think of an interview as being a one-way situation. It's the employer judging you, and you don't have anything to say about it. But in truth, an interview is two ways. It's your chance to find out what they want to hire you for and what about the organization, that kind of stuff. It's your chance to impress them by displaying your knowledge and your skills and your experience. So it really is two-way, and it's a discussion. It may, in some cases, you may not have a good interviewer that doesn't make it feel like a discussion, but I would like to assure you that it is two-way. There's more good news, and that is that, well, I think we in the 50+ generation too often are concerned by, and this is real, age discrimination and bad stereotypes about older people. The truth of the matter is there are positive stereotypes about 50+ workers and people. They tend to be considered trustworthy or stable and mature and have good judgment, wise. And if you've talked to anybody who has an interesting Gen Z worker, you've probably heard complaints. So another piece of very good news is that, as I understand it, there are 20 employers that are here today. Many of them are repeats, which means they know this audience, they like this audience, and they've hired people from this audience. So I completely, there's really a lot of good news. So I consider the keys to success, and you're going to hear me say some of these things many different times, hopefully in different ways, that the keys to success are to plan, prepare, and then be there and present yourself, answer questions, which are usually at the heart of at the interview, and then finish and follow up. And I'm going to talk about each of these. And I'd like to begin by talking about how important it is to do your research. Before you go to an interview, you know, gone are the days where you hang up the phone or answer the email and forget about it until you show up and introduce yourself to go to the meeting. And of course, your interview might be online. I suggest that you check out news media, trade press. You can take a look at social media like LinkedIn or Glassdoor. And for those of you who don't know what Glassdoor is, there are a whole bunch of different things, but the reason I'm mentioning them here is because they allow people to rate their employers. But I want to caution you and to remember that people tend to post on sites like this if they're very, very happy or very, very unhappy. So I guess what I'm saying is, take it with a grain of salt if somebody is saying this is the worst place ever. However, if there are 100 posts that say this is the worst place ever, you probably might want to listen to that. Another source of more occupational information is ONET Online. And for those of you who've been in Career Gateway, you know that you already have worked in ONET Online. And this would help you maybe flesh out your understanding about, if you have a job title that you understand most, but not all, and the job description didn't say it, this is another place. They also have some salary information. Last, but by far not least, are to check out your professional contacts. Who do you know who knows somebody who works there? Um, or through LinkedIn, maybe you can introduce yourself to somebody through LinkedIn. I made a very big mistake by not, I was in a hurried, I was getting laid off. I got a job lead. I interviewed, I got the job. I went there. It was really awful. And after I resigned, a friend of mine said to me, "Why didn't you ask me? I would have told you that it was a toxic place." Lesson learned. I'm passing it along to you. Keep in mind when you do your research that you want to know what the employer motivators are. Employers always have motivators. They always have reasons for hiring people. You may or may not know what those reasons are, but you might be able to guess before you go and learn more at the interview. But these are usually things like they want the organization to make more money or save money or have a higher stature in the industry. Could be they want to be more efficient, more productive. Those are all motivations for employers to hire. And remember, it's a buy decision for them. And that is they need to spend money, they have to spend time in order to hire somebody. So, and they also have pain points, and some of them, and what I mean by this, there are challenges. And you also might be able to find this by talking to people, by reading about them. I mean, imagine what it'd be like to think about the pain points of the managers over at Red Lobster these days. And for those of you who don't know, they had a very failed advertising campaign or promotion. So I suggest that your next step in your planning process is to collect the information about, and I also suggest you write this down. It doesn't need to be the great American novel, but collect the information when and where you, and how you did things that this employer is looking for. You probably have a job description, you probably have some information, probably doesn't include everything, but work with what you can. So think about ways that you went above and beyond to achieve a goal. By the way, this is both volunteer and paid work count. Think about when you led a successful team or accomplished something that others could not. All these places where you are proud of what you did and it is likely relevant to the job that you're interviewing for. So then, again, on paper or on your computer or with crayon or paintbrushes, I suggest you start thinking about responses to the common questions. And common question, by the way, I've been teaching interviewing for about 4 years. And in groups that are smaller than this, I ask people to send me their questions. What questions give them trouble? 100% of the time, I get how do I answer strengths and weaknesses? You know, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And we'll talk about that. Also, people have a hard time with tell me about yourself. I'm not saying you do, I'm just saying many do. Why did you leave your job, especially if it was not a happy parting? How do you answer salary questions? And we're going to talk about those today. And you also can, for inspiration, find questions by using ChatGPT or one of its cohorts, or be old fashioned and look it up on the internet. So there are lots of ways to find questions that might be asked, to help you think about how you would answer those questions. If you listen to nothing else I say today, I hope you walk away with the fact that stories are powerful. Research shows that stories are remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone. That means we're saying no go to Joe Friday of Dragnet. It's not just the facts man, it's stories. And I'm not talking about bedtime stories or stories for children. I'm talking about really what you might think of are anecdotes, giving information about something you did and adding some details that give it color, make it human, that kind of stuff. So as you're getting ready, I'm suggesting that you think about stories about your accomplishments, your successes, definitely about your strengths and weaknesses. When did you lead a team? When did you increase sales? When did you improve productivity. When did you save the day? And if you think of them ahead of time, they're more likely to be at the top of your mind when you get to that interview. Okay, you've done your preparation, you've done your planning, you're ready to go. So the first piece of advice from pretty much everyone is to be active and engaged in the conversation. And I warn you that since some of you are going to be having your interviews on Zoom or on the phone, you do have to gin it up a bit. When you're on Zoom, you don't look quite as energetic, and there's research about this. You don't look quite as energetic as you would in person. So that means, and I'm not asking you to dance around the room, but just be conscious of that and maybe speak a little louder, maybe a little with a little more changes in your tone. I don't mean for you to feel weird, but keep in mind that you may want to try and push yourself a little to appear more active and engaged. Now, I do suggest that you avoid saying things like, I hate Zoom, and I never used it during the pandemic, so I have no friends left. Excuse me. Uh, Even if you hate Zoom, chances are you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have an online meeting, and it is not a good idea to say you hate them before you ever walk in. And then things like carbon paper and Rolodexes are really not in the workplace anymore. If somebody has one, maybe they have one, but for the most part, that isn't the way we're working. So I'm suggesting to you, somebody might have a Rolodex that they're planning to donate to the Smithsonian or something. But anyway, they're generally not used very much anymore. Yellow pages. Really, really sad they don't have those very much anymore. So, and they're online and they're different and not necessarily, the stuff isn't necessarily free. So let's not talk about them. I would avoid statements that focus on your age, like back in the day, and definitely avoid, oh, I did that when the dinosaurs walked the earth. So, your job in an interview, of course, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, is to listen carefully to the questions. People get nervous in interviews. I get nervous in interviews. So, it's particularly important to be listening to what the person asks you. If you don't understand the question, you don't understand what they're looking for, certainly ask them. I had a client who we really had to work hard because she would listen to the question and then go off, for way too long. And what we worked on together is that she gave a short answer and then she said, "Do you want to know more about this?" So if you're somebody who tends to hear it and take off like a train, try and avoid that. Try and make your answer brief and check in. An important thing to do in an interview is to consider the intent of the question. Now, many of you know that employers are not supposed to ask you if you have kids, grandkids, whether you have a spouse. But the truth is that sometimes an interviewer is going to ask you things like that to warm up the conversation, to try and establish rapport with you. And I suggest you respond as such, that you don't have to spill your guts, but I suggest strongly that you don't take offense. Chances are the intent of this question is whether or not anything's going to get in the way of your being ready to work for your work hours. That is likely the intent. But if you want to, so I suggest you avoid thinking to yourself and acting like they're not allowed to ask that question. I don't want to work here if they're going to ask me an illegal question. I suggest to you in turn, go on with the interview. Every interview is a learning experience. And if you decide you don't want the job after you know everything about it, say no. But if the intent of the question is, are you available for work? Then answer that question. Yes, if you mention children, and keep in mind that it is not illegal to ask you if anything will get in the way if you're getting to work every day or every other day or whenever you're working. Another thing to remember is to tailor your responses to the job. So if you're even if you have any number of job, you've got 5 or 6 job leads, hot leads on the table, and you got this interview was first, but you don't think it's your first choice. If they ask you something like, where do you want to be in 5, 10, or 15 years? First of all, you really have no way of knowing where you're really going to be. But also keep in mind, you want to tailor this to the job, even if that might be fudging a little, but when you're there, dance with the one you're with. Another question to tailor to the job is, why do you want to work here? So chances are you applied for a reason. I like your mission. I like the work I do. I da, 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 da. So those are questions where you're tailoring it to the job, and it's your first love when you're there, and perhaps it isn't when you walk out the door. Another great interview strategy, and I think you can use this in many different settings besides an interview, but it really works in interviews, and that's the no but approach. So if you're in a situation where they're asking you a question, but you don't quite have or don't have what they're looking for, but you're going to have it soon, you may have some or not, but not all. You may have done something similar that prepared you to do this job. So for example, they may say to you, do you have a CPA? If you're in accounting, you might say, no, but I finished the coursework. I'm taking a prep class. My test is scheduled for this date, and I expect to have a CPA in X number of months. If you don't have a CPA and you aren't going to get one, you can say, no, but I've been working in accounting doing this, this, and this for the last 10 years. You haven't worked there for 50. Remember, talk about you've had a long time, long history. You said in your job description, that you need this kind of experience, and this is what I've done. And that's what you talk about what you've done. And it really works. I had a friend who was trying to change careers from being a printing supervisor, operations manager for a printer, and trying to be and changing careers to be a special ed teacher. And he called me afterwards. We had practiced together, and we called me afterwards. He said, I used the no but approach so many times during this interview. Well, he got the job. He got the job. He's just finishing his first year as a special ed teacher in Montgomery County. He's the bravest person I know. And he's in his 60s. Another question that people find difficult sometimes, and I would say to you, someone's going to ask something like this. It may not be, tell me about yourself. It might be, can you give me some background? Can you tell me more about your resume or something like that? But I strongly suggest that you have something ready to answer this. I was coaching a young woman, and I used to tease her because on interviewing, and I teased her because I said to her that I think you'd rather jump off the Brooklyn Bridge than answer the question, tell me about yourself. Well, suddenly she had a real interview, and she got on it, and she figured out how to do it, and she created a great tell me about yourself response. Think about talking about how you got in the field, what your experience is, what you're relevant for this job accomplishments. Good idea to finish by connecting to the job you're interviewing for. And depending on the situation, you want it to be about 30 seconds and up to 2 minutes at the most, unless more questions come in and stuff like that. So here's a sample, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can but I'm going to give you the high points. This guy, well, I don't know if it's a man or a woman. I've been an account manager for over a decade. I've primarily been working with tech companies to build strong client relationships and deliver tailored service solutions. My experience includes navigating complex contract negotiations and consistently achieving above target retention rates. He goes on to talk about a specific accomplishment at his current job. Talks about saying, I'm good at building relationships, and I love making sure satisfaction rates remain high. He then connects it to the job. So when I saw your ad, I wanted to apply immediately. I'm really impressed by your company's commitment to innovation. I'm pretty excited about the opportunity to put my strategic thinking to good use and use my client management skills to help your team. Now, no, I don't think your tell me about yourself should sound like this, but I'd like you to take a look at the attributes and characteristics of this one and try and include them. There are specifics. He's not he's connecting it to the job. I guess I think it is a man. But anyway, so that's a I suggest a way to go. As I told you,
Anne,
huh?
we have a question. Can I address,
Sure.
because if it
Go.
falls in what you're saying. Someone asked, how do I go about answering the question, when did you demonstrate your achievements?
Well, let me how do you answer the question, or when do you?
Um, I
Can
think
you answer? Can you give me the question again?
yes. How do you go about answering the question? So this is in an interview.
Okay.
When did you demonstrate your achievements? I don't know if that question would be asked as this person is
Yeah.
saying, when did you demonstrate your achievements? But I think we
Right.
could say, give me an example of when you were working and how how you showed, how you were successful, and you demonstrated how you were able to succeed in that achievement.
Okay.
Mhm,
What I would say to you is, way back when I was talking about think about your accomplishments, think about things you've done, and have them at the
mhm,
front of your mind.
mhm,
Um, when you do stories about those, and I'm going to demonstrate a few, I
mhm.
think you'll see how what you can do to present the answers to that kind of a question.
Okay,
So
okay.
I'm going to introduce something called the STAR approach in a few more
Mhm,
slides. And so
mhm,
that is a way to present. And I'm also in this section going to talk about how to talk about strengths and how to talk about weaknesses. And I think
mhm.
that's going to hit the question you've got. And if it doesn't, why don't we return to it at the end?
Okay, okay. And there's another question you want to hold off until you get
Well,
another
tell
break.
me what it is, so if I can
Okay.
catch it on my way.
This person says that they have their own, they've had their own web design business for 28 years, and now they're looking for regular full-time employment that uses some of those skills that they've used in the past in their web design, but they don't want to necessarily do web design, but the transferable skills into their new position. Do you have any tips on presenting herself in this scenario?
Again, what I would say to you is, during the planning, think about those transferable skills and think about stories that illustrate that you've used those skills. And those stories can be about using them in your business, but you're using them.
Okay.
Because the thing about stories, and again, not bedtime stories, the thing about stories is you are able to add context. And instead of having to say, I'm wonderful at this, you illustrate it by what you do. Okay. So I'm going
Okay.
to give you some stories I'm going to give you some stories associated with strengths and weaknesses. So I'd like to do that and see if that helps both of these folks.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
I
Mhm,
mentioned a moment ago about the STAR approach, and this is very commonly taught by career people and stuff. And that is, it's a structure where you talk about the situation, what happened, what you needed to do, or what was the challenge that you had to overcome, what did you actually do, and what was the outcome or result. So I'm going to start with a strength, but uh, remember when you talk about, hold on a sec. When you talk about these things, when you talk about strengths, you can talk about things that might be hard for you to remember or maybe hard for you feeling shy or something to talk about your strengths. But things you might want to do are that you're collaborative, that you're detail oriented, you're a leader, you're that you've done things in the workplace. And here's a story. My strength is persistence. Our managers really wanted to add a quiz to a website that I led the migration of, but there were technical, privacy, and content issues associated with it. And in other words, it was pretty much of a big pain in the neck. And the person we assigned it to basically kept kicking the can down the road. Somehow he never got around to doing it. And so I decided that this needed to happen. The managers wanted it. So I sat down with our developer and I sat down with our content people, and we hammered out, we sort of teased out what were the issues, what did we have to do to overcome them. And it was tedious work and it was a pain in the neck, but we did it and our managers were happy. So that is the story. That really happened, by the way. Um, so uh, so that is a way to tell a story. And let's talk about weaknesses for a moment. That's harder and easier. We used to talk about telling people that your weakness is that you work too hard, or your weakness is that you won't quit until the job is done. And we got some feedback and some articles from recruiters who said, no, 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 we don't buy that anymore. Or we didn't buy it then either. So, for example, I'm an analyst, but my Excel skills were really kind of lousy. I could do the equivalent of hunting and pecking on a typewriter in Excel. So it was poor. So I signed up for all the classes at the place that were offered at NIH at the time. There were about 5. I made friends with the instructor. I did all the practices. I started trying to do more sophisticated reports. And after a few months of this, I was able to do any report I needed to do. Now, I'm not talking big fancy spreadsheets like you get from your financial planner, but I could do analytics report and presentations that worked for our staff, and they were really happy, and it was an effort worth doing. So I've got another weakness. I had a student in class who grew up in Puerto Rico, and as an adult, so when she was in Puerto Rico, all she did was speak Spanish. She spoke Spanish at work, at home, etc. And I think she was military, so she got transferred with her husband to the mainland. And all of a sudden, she really had to speak English. People didn't understand her. It was really difficult. They always asked her to repeat. They asked her to clarify. And so what she did was she did sign up for classes. But the thing that caught my ear was that she watched a lot of American TV and tried to read the newspaper. And what she noticed was, as she improved, people stopped asking her all the time to repeat stuff. They stopped telling her they couldn't understand her. And it was a lot of work to get there, but it was really worth doing. So that's her weakness. That's what she did. This is a true story, by the way. That's what she did. And I hope you can see in your head a picture of what she did. Okay. And what the weakness was and how she truly doesn't have it anymore. Okay. And those stories can be used, and that kind of telling a story can be used in a different way, like to talk about transferable skills. Okay, it's not necessarily weak. Um, Another question that people find difficult. Now, I know this says easy answers, but it's not. They're not that they're easy answers so much as, of course, it's easy to say you got a better job. It's not easy on you that you got laid off or a company was downsized, but no one's going to blame you for that. No one's going to think, "Oh my God, it was your fault," unless you're the CEO, that you got laid off or downsized or whatever. So those are easy to answer in a quick, I got laid off, the job went away, whatever. And so those are easy to explain. Harder to explain is if your departure was difficult. Um, and I suggest if your departure was difficult, that you prepare a brief response, neutral, 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 and practice it until you can say it without flinching. I sent my friend who was changing from operations manager to special ed teacher. I actually sent him to a job fair and said, practice. If you're fired, which is, generally speaking, awful, and also people can see your nonverbal if you don't practice, and people can see in your nonverbal communication that this was painful. But I suggest that you talk about what you learned from that situation and the steps you took to improve. So, for example, I know someone who got fired from a sales training job. It was really painful, and he really wanted to do that work. So, what he did was he signed up for a kind of a heavyweight certification. Took maybe 6 months to a year. lots of observed practice, lots of homework, and that kind of stuff. So by the time he was ready to interview again, he could say, I understand what was wrong with my techniques before. I now know how to do this right. And he did get a job. Remember, of course, not to say anything negative about your organization or the boss. Um, you might need to say something like, I decided to leave because the company was going into a different direction and my skills weren't needed, or I disagreed about the direction of a project, or something like that. Think about something that's neutral, that doesn't say, even though it may be true that the person you were working for was the worst person that you've ever met in your entire life. None of that. Neutral, neutral, neutral. And I would say practice if you have a hard time saying it. I don't want to leave you without talking about salary negotiation. Um, it's really true that if you don't negotiate, you may be leaving money on the table. Um, in some ways, I think we're in a much better place now when you need to negotiate salary, because there's much more information than they ever had, even when I started working in the middle of my career, because we didn't so much have the internet. But now we do. And you can do research on what jobs pay on things like salary.com and monster.com, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing you need to do as homework is decide what salary and benefits you want. You can do this by, you can even figure out, there are websites where you can put in what the salary of the job, and they can tell you what, you put in the details and they'll say what your paycheck will be. Um, so you can have a lot of information about, and there's also, in some cases, it's good salary negotiations. Sometimes it's kind of, I'm sorry, salary transparency, but in some states it's required. But if they give you a salary range of 90,000 to 250, that is not going to be helpful.
Right.
If you get a real salary range, it probably will. So we generally recommend that you try and delay the salary discussion. You may or may not be able to do this, but one way to respond if it's brought up early is to say, I prefer to talk about salary after I know more about the job. Will they accept that? I don't know. It may work. It's worth trying. Another way to talk about this, if they won't give you an, if they insist on a number, try and find out what the salary range, or in HR speak, what are the salary bands for this job, and try and respond to ranges. Yes, I can work in that range. Another thing is to consider non-financial compensation. That is paid time off, the schedule. My son took a job and he was excited about this. He took a job where you did not get 1 second of leave for the first year, and it was damn difficult to get unpaid time off. So the reality of that was kind of tough. Um, and I understand at Starbucks, they change your schedule every week. That's something you need to know about if that's the kind of job you're going for. Of course, people these days want remote work, hybrid work. There's much less totally remote work than there was a few years ago. If you absolutely can't get the money you want and you really want this job because everything else about it is good, you might try and negotiate an early performance review. So, say in 3 months, we'll get back together, we'll do a performance review and salary negotiation. That can work. That can work, especially if you're interested, if job is something you really want. Oh, this is a salary review I did with a young person. We kind of thought the job, this is a physical therapy aide, we thought the job didn't pay enough. And then we looked it up and saw in Chevy Chase, Maryland, the job was going to pay about 15. It doesn't pay much more. So before you say goodbye, it's a good idea to ask questions about the job, to inquire about the next steps in the hiring process. They may or may not know. They may or may not know how much, when they'll make a decision. Good idea to check in with the interviewer to say, is there anything else you would like to know? Try and plan for follow-up, because if you ask ahead of time, whether you can send an email or a text or whatever, and they say yes, they can do it. Otherwise you're probably waiting. Absolutely send a thank you message. Probably, to make it quick, it ought to be email, but you can do both. Sending something by postal mail is much more unusual and maybe more noticeable. But I will tell you, if you're interviewing for a federal office and you want to send the mail, they're still scanning the mail for anthrax. So when the mail comes, when it goes to some place around, I think around here, where they scan it, and weeks later it dribbles into the office. So keep in mind who you're talking, who you're sending what kind of email, and what kind of a thank you note. Another thing, if you can, try and stay in touch with the interviewer. So often people don't make decisions as fast as they're going to, but you might be able to help yourself by being able to ask without being a pain in the neck nudge. And anyway, so back to questions. I'll answer as many as I can now and in the chat. And anybody who'd like
Okay,
to ask me
great.
a question I don't get to, please send it to me by email and I'll answer.
Okay, I
So I
have,
don't know whether I got that, whether my demonstrations of telling a story helped with the one about how do I, when somebody says, tell me about, I don't know if that answered
I
it
think,
enough.
yeah, they have, if you have additional questions, for those people who ask those questions, put them in chat, but we have lots of questions for you, Anne, so I'm gonna start giving them to you.
Okay. And of course, email me if I didn't get, for somebody who I
Yeah,
didn't get.
and you'll have a few minutes in chat after your presentation, so they
Sure.
can always, right. Is it okay to refer to written notes during the interview?
You can come with a notepad, but I think I would try and be more ready to talk than to really be depending on notes. So I'm gonna almost say it depends. But when you're talking about your own background, I would say probably not too many notes. You might have a piece of paper with keywords on it or something. You certainly can bring a pen and paper with you, or be. I don't know. Somebody else can give me their opinion about sitting there with a computer. That somehow that doesn't feel comfortable to me, um, but yes,
Okay,
I think yes, you can have notes,
yeah,
because you can make the notes look like they're questions you want to ask them.
of course, of course. And especially if it's on Zoom, you can have them down, you
Oh,
can maybe read
absolutely.
about
If
it.
on Zoom you
Yeah,
can have everything posted around, if everything
right.
posted around you.
And
Um,
if you're in person, you could, I mean, they're taking notes, and you can always say, do you mind me jotting down some notes,
Absolutely.
as we're talking,
And
which
you can
is
have notes on the thing you bring in. I think what I
yeah.
was thinking is, if you've got 10 pages of
No.
whatever, I think that's a little much. I think
Yes.
moderation is the key to the game.
Yes. Here we go. Can you give any guidance with how to answer the question when you are asked to walk me through your resume? I got caught up in this question because I had been working 25 plus years, and it was a federal job. So they had the whole job history right in front of them. So, and that is a question that is asked, walk me through your resume. So how would you suggest they highlight what I would say you should highlight what is relevant to the job you are,
Absolutely.
that you are
Absolutely.
interviewing for.
I think
Um,
I agree with you. I mean, my federal resume was 10 plus pages long, but I would keep, what I would say to you is to start with kind of the most recent and the most important, and also check in. Would you like to know about, this project or that project, because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. Um, so that's what I would say, that
mm,
that I would they don't want to hear your whole resume. I can just about
No,
swear to you about
no,
that.
that would be
So I
too long
think
of a.
the idea of doing their work for you, for them, to say basically, well, I did this and this. Uh, um, would you prefer to hear about this or that, or just start with the most recent job and then
Mhm,
say, would you like to know about X job? Would you
mhm,
like to know when I did X?
right,
Um,
right,
I just, I think walk me through your resume is not an uncommon question, but I don't think they really mean it. They don't really
right,
mean they want you to go, and then, and then I just think
right,
um,
right, exactly.
you need to know about the high points, and
Hmm.
you or they can always say, oh, I'd like to know more about that project. When you
Mm-hmm.
migrated that website, you know, from a site that didn't have media. How was that? Or something like that.
Right,
Um, but I would
okay,
help them by giving
right,
them some questions that you might like to answer.
right, very good, okay. What suggestions do you have for persons who have been self-employed for decades? There are no HR departments for the potential employer to contact to verify the veracity of the applicant's claims. So what do you do? I mean, because we do have people who've been self-employed and now they're coming back and they want, that W-2 income. And so, how
They
would
want
you,
insurance and
address that?
benefits. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think there are a couple things. I think you can say, I've done this and this kind of project. This is a long-term client. You can talk about that. I hope it doesn't get to doing tax forms,
Hmm.
to do that. But I think, if there's any proof, like, for example, if you've written a book for the government, or written a book for anybody, there's the book, or there's the website or that kind of stuff. I that's what I would say. And then the idea, if you have a client who's willing to talk to them and say,
Hmm.
this has
Very
been my
good.
client for 10 years. I don't think people have a tendency to not believe you when you say, I've done this for 20 years or 10 years, and I don't. If they're really going into the proof game, there's a little problem with trust, which
Right,
may,
right.
may not be a good situation. But I think there are ways, if you can prove by products, if you can say, I've been working for the department of, well, I keep thinking government, or this contract, this company, or this, because usually if you're working on your own, you have clients, you have
Well,
customers.
I do like the fact that because, because and this goes for the similar question is, I've been out of the workforce for so long, I don't have, any, viable references, they are not working anymore, or they've passed along, or just whatever. And I
Right.
think, if you've been working with clients, they can be wonderful references. Um,
Absolutely.
and
And
I
they're
think
probably happy to do it.
yes, yes. And I think, or if you've been, if you haven't been in the paid workforce for a while, but you've been volunteering at something, that is another wonderful, reference and resource, as well as, the organization that you've been volunteering, or,
Exactly.
so I think that those are all, great suggestions. How
Yeah,
important?
just one
Mhm,
second. I was going to say that with people with gaps,
mhm,
especially big gaps, we
sure.
suggest, generally the suggestion is to volunteer quick, get into a volunteer situation, take classes, do something that's current. And that's just
Yes.
to take the
And
emphasis off the gap.
And I actually, I was contacted yesterday by a Career Gateway grad who just found success. She's employed and making, and she's 66 years old, and she's earning
Whoa.
six figures, and she is earning more than she ever thought she would be earning.
Mhm.
And she said she had a big gap, and she said when something she would recommend is volunteering with purpose, like volunteering in something that, if you're interested in re-entering and doing something in XYZ, volunteering in a capacity that could enhance
Exactly.
your re-entrance into the
Exactly.
workforce. And so,
Absolutely.
and
I
so
couldn't
I
agree
thought,
more.
Yes, and I thought that was a great,
Mm.
I think she used the tagline volunteering with purpose. And I think that is, and she said that volunteer experience really helped her land the job. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So we'll go on to our next question because we have just 4 more minutes. How important is highlighting soft skills when interviewing?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by highlighting soft skills, but what I would say to you is it's much stronger instead of saying I'm great working with people or I'm great at this, I'm great at that. It's much better to talk about situations in which you couldn't have done whatever it is you did without those soft skills. So you can say I'm a great communicator, but you
Mm-hmm.
can say I led a 5-person team on a year-long project where we met all the deadlines and blah, blah, blah. If you don't have any soft skills, you can't do that. So that's a way to talk about, besides saying, you know, I'm just a great human, hire me. So
Right.
this is,
Right.
you can give some, you can give some proof without having to do what a lot of people are uncomfortable. And you're proving it, which is even more
Mm-hmm.
important. You're
Right.
giving that context and that color. You can't do some of these things without decent soft skills.
Right.
So we
Exactly.
talk about that on a resume too. That
Mm-hmm.
that there are things you could not do
And our
if you.
soft skills are an area where our 50 plus population shine.
Sure. Another
So
good
that is,
reason.
yes, yes. Um, our next question is this individual says they were recently interviewed for a grant manager position, and he believes that he did not perform well despite the fact that he has strong experience and qualifications. The struggle was that with the questions were open-ended. Example, give an example where you developed a new management system. Reflecting on this experience, I think I failed to provide enough details showing his showcasing his experience and achievements. What would be the best strategy to answer these types of questions effectively?
Right. I didn't get to that because I didn't quite have enough time, but those are really they're kind of like behavioral questions. Tell me about a
Mm-hmm,
time
mm-hmm.
when.
Sure.
And so it's again, I know I'm hammering this, it's again about telling a story that, well, I was the in charge of the grants for blah, blah, and blah, blah. And that job included blah, 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 blah. And this is what I did. This is how I was successful there.
Right.
So
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that helps, but that's basically any of the, there are negative ones too, and they're very hard to plan for. A negative behavior question would be, tell me a time when you didn't get along with a coworker. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You need to hit it. You can't not answer, or, you can not answer, but I suggest that you don't answer. But in this situation, they're asking him to tell them, give them some context, give them some color to the story about what he did, that show that without saying it, that show, yes, he knows how to calculate this or write statements of work or whatever.
Right.
Uh,
Right. And we'll
I'm
answer.
you're saying a grant administrator, but think about the things they're asking for in that job. And I would say, think about them ahead of time. I
Mhm.
realize I'm like I'm repeating myself a million times, but the truth is that if you can think of some of this stuff ahead of time, even for questions that you can't quite anticipate, you can anticipate that they're going to talk to you about your experience. You just don't know how they're going to talk to you about your experience.
Right. Right. And then we have one more question. We have lots more questions, but the last one we'll answer. And then if you can go into chat, if you have a few minutes,
Sure,
and
sure,
um,
happy to.
how, how do you make a toxic work environment sound neutral? Because you don't want to badmouth your previous employer, but it was, but it wasn't a great experience. And, you know, I guess you could say, that you left, you had different ways to tackle issues, and that,
Right, you can talk a lot about fit.
mm-hmm,
The job was not a good fit for me. And if
mm-hmm,
you can possibly get away without talking about why it wasn't a good fit. I got fired from a job because I wouldn't lie to a client, to a contractor. This is really a bad thing about me. This is true. I'm a terrible liar. I'm awful. And nobody told me in the interview that I was going to have to lie, but that's a little awkward. And they did fire me for it. So, but I don't talk about that in an interview. If somebody asked me about that job, I talk about the things I did there. I did focus groups. I did this. I did that. And then you can also say, you had a difference of opinion with the way the project was managed or the work was managed.
That's perfect. And that's
They were
okay.
mean to me is probably not the right answer, but when I
Right.
was, when I wouldn't lie for the people I was working for, um, but it wasn't worth explaining either,
Right, right,
because
right.
you think I'm just complaining. I know you all are going to believe everything I say, but the truth is that, my friends knew, and I still am like, when I think about it, I'm like, oh my God, my weakest weak point. Nobody asked me, and I wouldn't have
Mhm.
brought it up in my weaknesses either. Oh, I'm a terrible liar. And places want me to lie for them. So you've got to pull out the good things you did there and
Mhm,
just say you had a difference of opinion with the decision, with the way the project was progressing or the way they were meeting their goals or something.
mhm,
And that's and stay away. But honest to God, I did. I got fired for lying, not for not lying. You
Well,
know.
and this
Uh,
has been, I mean, you have so many questions, additional questions
okay,
that we were not able to bring up. This was a wonderful presentation. We so appreciate you being here today. Do you mind jumping in chat,
sure,
and answering as
of
many as you can? Because
course.
there's a lot. They're starting at 10:45. The question
Okay,
begins, if you're on Medicare, and then the question's going downward. So there are
okay,
15, there are about 15 minutes of questions downward. And if you can answer them directly so that when Elise comes
right.
on,
Go to the person. Go to
exactly,
the person.
exactly,
Right. I'm
exactly.
going
So
to put my email in there for everyone, and then I'll go only to people. Okay.
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Good.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, Anne. This was wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, thank you. Okay, and now